resources that we have here on Earth is our land resources. And why do we need to manage Earth's land resources at all? Well, as somebody that likes different species, even plants and animals, I want them to have a place to live. And I also want to have sustainable like crops so that we can take care of humans and have the things that we need to live and for food. You could also say that we manage the land just because we want it to stay beautiful, like our natural national parks, or so that we can preserve some of our land and structures for future generations or preserve our history. So, once we have used a resource altogether, we have to either find a replacement resource or start recycling and reusing things that we have used, before in the past. Um, so here it mentions national parks, and that about 50% of the land in the national park system is actually just wilderness, which I love that it's just wild space, that we're not, doing much to it to have to manage it. It's just taking care and naturally um, happening there, and natural processes are happening. And then another one is that we have some national wildlife refuges. And in these spaces, as long as um, the activity that you're doing makes sense for what the national refuge is for, then you can do it. For example, some of them allow hunting or fishing or even logging in some of those places, even grazing and farming. As long as it fits with the purpose of the refuge, then you can use the land for that purpose. So, there's different natural resources that we get from the Earth's crust, and they are actually in the title of this section. So they are soil, aggregates, bedrocks, and ores, and we're going to talk about each one of those separately. So one important one is soil. I never gave soil a second thought, I don't think, until when I was maybe a young homeowner and one of my tomato plants had an insane number of ants below it. So I put all this ant poison around the base of my tomato plants. And looking back, I don't know why I thought that would be a good idea. But anyways, all the tomatoes that I harvested that year were inedible because when you would go to eat them, it literally just tasted like poison. The poison had just come straight up the plant, was in the tomato. And while the tomatoes looked great, they were inedible and not usable. They were just full of that ant poison. And I don't know why it took something like that as obvious to me to just go, oh, wait, when I pour this poison here, it doesn't just stay here. It goes into the plants, and then the animals that eat the plants, including me, are going to have that poison in it. So, when I've done research in different parts of the world, a lot of times what we've seen is the microorganism health of the soil, how healthy the soil is, if there's a lot of poisons in it, or if the microorganisms like the small bacteria and things that live in the soil, if they're not healthy, the whole ecosystem will not be healthy. It's very important. Well, here in the United States, not only do we battle that, but we also have to be careful with the loss of our topsoil. Across the world, we are losing about 7% of our topsoil each year, which that's a significant amount of topsoil. And to anybody that really knows like farming really well or agriculture, that topsoil is extremely important because that's basically what helps things to grow. Once you lose that, you turn into a desert in this process called desertification. And many places across the planet, including they're seeing some evidence of this in Southern California, are becoming desertified where they are losing their topsoil, and so they're no longer able to have crops. So to keep topsoil in, farmers have to be careful in how they plow so that it's not just all plowed up and blows away. That topsoil just blows away. We have to be careful like how we plow, and then planting like wind plants that will kind of be shields against the wind so that topsoil doesn't blow away. I mean, this really was caused part of the Great Depression in the United States was having a lot of the topsoil just in the Dust Bowl just blowing away. Um, so, as our human population grows, we need to get smarter and smarter with how we're farming and making sure that we're supporting farmers and supporting ranchers in ways that will help them meet these practices and farm in a sustainable way. I think sometimes we pass laws that only hurt their farming but don't encourage like good farming. So we need to be there and step up because they're really the source of all of our food. um, so at any rate, these are areas in Africa that where desertification has happened. So these are areas that were not previously full deserts but have become deserts over time because of the process of desertification. We need to be careful that that's not happening here in the United States as well. Like, do as much as we can to slow that down. Okay, so aggregates, the definition of the word aggregate is basically a grouping of smaller like parts that aren't the same. They're just a different like smaller groupings of things together. So aggregates are found underneath the topsoil, and a lot of times it's like small little rocks. This is actually used as a resource in building materials all the time. So it's usually glacier deposits or floodplains will have collections of small stones, and this can be used as the foundation of buildings a lot of times, the foundations of roads. It's really used quite often. Another source is bedrock, which is solid stone, which is found underneath that. It can be granite, marble, other limestone. That is a solid rock that is cut out, is the bedrock. So an ore is a resource that can be mined for profit. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me give you two examples. Limonite is a stone that has iron in it, but it has so little iron in it that when you mine it, it's not like worth it to like get that iron extracted from it. So it's not worth it to keep it. But hematite is also a rock that has iron in it, and it has enough iron in it that it does make it profitable. Therefore, hematite is called an ore, and limonite is not. It's just a rock. So an ore has to be something that's profitable to mine. So there's a few different ways that um, ores like can occur with different metals. First of all, crystals can settle out of like magma. When magma is cooling, pieces of it will like cooler parts of it will start to settle and crystallize, and some forms crystals and some of the heavier parts will fall out of those crystals, which will be like copper or gold will be so heavy that it'll settle out. So you'll have some with crystals and some separate out to the gold or copper. You can also have different important metals. Like this is iron that settled out in these bands. These red bands are the iron. And this happened during the Precambrian. So again, a non-renewable resource, obviously, because we don't have the same conditions that were there in the Precambrian. Scientists aren't exactly sure why these bands form. They just know that's how old the rocks are. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about is these gorgeous things. I wish I could find these, called placer deposits, where when you have a stream that's headed like downstream and it's about ready to turn around a curve, when it hits that curve, sometimes the really heavy stuff falls out around the curve because it slows down. So it'll fall out. And that's where you can find silver and gold a lot of times because it's being carried down the river, but then it hits a slow part, so it falls down. You can have these placer deposits, which are heavy sediments that are deposited in sandbars.